And I'll call the meeting to order. This is the October regular meeting of the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District. We are having this meeting virtually, and we are recording for the record. And so for the record, I'm going to call the roll, and please let Emily know if you're here. So Ann Gravitt.
I'm here.
Bob Salinger.
I am here.
Lori Stegman. Not yet. Corky Collier.
Here.
Dave Ripma.
Here.
Mike Weatherby.
Yeah.
Shirley Craddock.
Present.
Eric Mullender.
Here.
James Allison. May not be here yet. John Niyama.
Mike, I'm here.
Great. John L. Bell. Not yet. Mary Helen Kincaid. Paul Lumley.
I'm here, but I can only be here for the first 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Steve Fancher.
Here.
Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Tony DeFalco. Tony's not here yet. And I see Lori Stegman.
Yes, here.
Thank you. So, anybody I missed that's here?
Al Humble visiting.
Al Humble, thank you for visiting.
And Mary Helen just arrived.
Hi, Mary Helen.
Hey,
Hi.
Tony DeFalco just arrived as well.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have an action-packed agenda today, and I think we lead off with Colin. Going to start with some backgrounding on the revenue model, correct? I can see you, but I can't hear you, Colin. Or I can see the screen, I should say.
Okay, and you're able to see the meeting
Yes.
agenda full screen currently?
Well, no, you're not in full screen yet, but we can see the.
All right. That is constant issue. Well,
You can see all your toolbars and everything there. Whoops.
all right. Here we go. Okay. So thank you all. This is Colin Rowan. I'm a Deputy Director at MCDD and run the Levy Ready Columbia program. And today, be going through some follow-up from last month's introduction to the Levy Ready Columbia revenue analysis. So going through some of the assumptions and gaps. So again, that analysis, the Levy Ready Columbia revenue analysis, was performed in 2017 and 2018 primarily, with some updates done in 2019. And really that was in support of a much larger conversation around governance. And the model itself was used to provide the legislature with financial analysis demonstrating the economic viability of consolidating the 4 existing districts, as well as moving to an alternative revenue model, largely focusing on moving from the current assessments that are used by the drainage districts to a utility model. So in determining the viability, there were really 2 large categories that were utilized, which were the operations, maintenance, and administration of the 4 districts, with 3 different funding, kind of high, low, and medium funding scenarios. That's largely looking at the O&M that's needed to keep the levy system mowed and in good shape, the conveyance system clear, and the pumps working, as well as all the administrative needs. And then a look at infrastructure modernization, or the capital investments that were needed. In the Levy Ready Columbia revenue analysis, this was largely focused on the known deficiencies that were needed for certification, which is requirements for FEMA, as well as known deficiencies needed to modernize to keep us in active status in our other regulator, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and their program is called the Rehabilitation and Inspection Program. So making sure we're meeting all those standards, and then applying the district's existing 5-year capital improvement program. So those were the categories that we're focused on through that revenue analysis. And while the revenue, it's not advancing, is it?
No, it hasn't been advancing.
That's fun. I swear that I don't always have tech issues. I think it's just with your board.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not true.
I don't always have technical issues, but when I do, it's when there's a board of 17 people looking at me. So.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. Okay.
Emily, are you able to pull that presentation up?
Let me give it a try.
Yeah, for his benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just do it. One more college try here. Emily, I think I actually have it.
Okay.
Okay. Are you now seeing revenue model development principles?
Yes.
Yes, not in full screen, but we've got it. We've got your notes and everything.
Oh, neat. Well, there's nothing too terrible in the notes, and Emily, maybe it would make sense if you pulled it up. Okay, so I did want to highlight that while the revenue analysis is the responsibility of your board to define, especially with the additional mission that was created in the legislature, the Levy Ready Columbia work group that did perform the analysis did define a few principles that they wanted this board to be cognizant of and consider. And the first being ensuring sustainable budgets, which is to make sure that whatever revenue that's developed will meet our current and future standards, as well as be responsive to best practices around asset management, and equitable distribution of costs, which is really to consider some of the historic issues around tax compression, as well as the different issues around ownership and lack of investment that's been able to be made across the 4 districts. Fairness to existing landowners was definitely highlighted to avoid spikes, high or low, and make sure that whatever is employed is fair to the landowners and understood by the landowners. So that involves an element of communication, making sure that it is whatever the rate may be, or the revenue tool that's employed, that's adaptable, scalable, and is based on the benefits received or costs incurred, which are a requirement for the utility rate if any of the other tools were employed. Transparent and simple implementation and administration was important, so that people would understand how the actual costs apply to them as an individual landowner. And then I think a big highlight was making sure that asset management best practices were employed. Would you go to the next slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to provide a bit more of the background process that Levy Ready Columbia used to define, and this will help identify what exactly was in that revenue analysis. And then the next slide will talk through some of the things that were not in the model that your board will need to consider. So the process was really driven through the larger governance work group, evaluated 6 different scenarios, and those scenarios were really taking a look at different ways that this could be cut, whether you can just switch from 4 separate districts into having 4 separate utility rates, using our existing budgets as a utility rate, a combination of utility and general obligation bonds, and a few different tiers. And by tiers, I mean geographic tiers, either the existing managed floodplain, the watershed, or a larger geographic area that receives some of the benefits. The Levy Ready Columbia work group engaged with FCS Group, who led the rate development model. They also did, they built an in-plan model. And so in the packet that went out last week to you, there was a little bit of a update or a review of that in-plan model. In-plan is a regional economic benefit scenario tool, basically, and it's something that can be updated, but it really looks at how different geographic distributions receive economic benefit. And then, of course, they, through FCS Group and this governance work group, really testing the different costs to make sure that they, that all the requirements were met. So yeah, that scenario planning was basically brought into it was basically summarized so that we could bring it to the legislature and use it as a tool of communication to help them understand that it was feasible and kind of prove the concept that it could change from our existing assessment methodology into a utility rate with the potential for a general obligation bond. Emily, could you go to the next slide, please?
And one thing I wanted to add for that, Colin, is that that packet was included FCS's kind of overview. And also you'll notice that it did have, when Colin said it considered 6 scenarios, there was an attached sheet that also kind of showed some of those results from that process.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot in that tool, and there's even more behind there. But I think this slide right here is really important for your board's consideration to understand some of the things that were not in the revenue analysis. Part of it is because what's come, from when that revenue analysis was done by FCS Group and the work group, that sort of predated a lot of the work that happened in the legislature during the 2019 session. And so one thing that's really important to highlight is that your board has a lot more tools to employ. Not only is there the ability to change to a utility, there's also the ability to charge system development charges, different kinds of user fees, develop local improvement districts, as well as using general obligation bonds and revenue bonds. So all those tools are at your hand and should be considered in developing an update to that revenue model. There's also a good bit of additional data that we've been doing just on what type of work needs to be done in the districts, what types of improvements and investments need to be made. So currently 3 out of 4 of the drainage districts have either completed or nearly completed drainage master plans. So this is really going to give you all much better understanding of the improvements needed for the internal or the conveyance system. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers feasibility study is really taking a look at some of the vulnerabilities of the levee system and giving a much better idea of some locations that might have fragility concerns that wouldn't have come up through other investigations. So those will actually put dollar numbers for both the pre-engineering design and the construction costs. And then currently the districts are going through a strategic asset management planning process. And so that will really be able to employ asset management best practices. So those types of considerations were not included in the previous analysis. And then I think pretty aware of the additional mission-related items that are included in the legislation. So that's everything from the environmental to equity, social justice, adaptation for climate change, and a more robust program around providing public information, especially around the cultural history of the floodplain. So all those things were not in the revenue analysis and will need to be considered.
Excuse me,
Emily?
Mike Weatherby here. Explain social justice in the operation of the district. How does that show itself?
That's a great question. So in the legislation, there is the stipulation in the mission of the district is to promote social equity and social justice in the district's operation. And so that's taking a look everything from HR practices to contracting practices, basically embedding or promoting equity in all of those efforts around operation and maintenance, administration, how the public weighs in on the work. So yeah, that's basically a charge that you have as a board, is to promote those principles.
Thank you.
So I'll just quickly go through what the path forward looks like. One we'll be talking about later on today is to establish the mission, vision, values, which will provide strategic guidance into what needs to be included in budgeting to actually create a revenue model or an update to the revenue model. We need to engage with a consultant or consultants to actually do that development. And obviously, we've highlighted some of the updates that need to be done. So I won't get too deep into it, but really revising those administrative O&M and capital requirements. And then we'll be needing to test and make sure that any of the tools that are employed obviously meet legal sufficiency, but also can be directly connected to the costs incurred or the benefits received by property owners. And then incorporating public engagement throughout this. The public engagement is important, not only so the public can weigh in on preferences or funding priorities, but it's also an important communication tool to help people better understand the work that happens behind the levees and to help them understand how this benefits the region. So I will end with that. Thank you very much.
Can I ask another question? It's Mike Weatherby.
Certainly, Mike.
How do you incorporate public engagement in a virtual world here?
That's a great question. Luckily, we have some very talented communication and outreach people, but that is something that we have been working on, trying to invite more people both to virtual meetings, but also through surveys. And then there are some firms that provide, it's almost like focus groups that are brought in, or Metro has an opt-in panel where people basically sign up to help provide public input. So there's a number of ways to do it, but it's definitely different.
And there's, and I'll just add to it that there are numerous ways of doing it, and it's not just on Zoom meetings, but are there possibilities, and we'll talk a little more about this as we get into the meeting further, but is there survey work? Are there focus groups? It's going to be kind of contingent on what our need is at the time, and those will be recommended to you all as we move along.
Other questions of Colin before we move on?
Yeah, Colin, I've got a couple of questions on the FCS group's memorandum. Is now a good time for us to cover those?
If it's short, Eric, he may have to get back to you just because we've got.
You know what, Mike, it's not going to be short. So what I will do, honestly, I mean, it's quite a bit of work, and the best way for me to handle that then is to put in an email to you and Peggotty and to Colin.
That'd be
Does that
great.
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
And what we would like to do is then when we can give answers, we can get it back to everybody as well. So
Yes, that'd be great. So I think there is a fair amount of material here. This is a dense subject, part of our work. And I'd like everybody to begin to think about the possibility of allowing a subcommittee to really attack this part of the work. There's a lot here. And I struggle to think about how a 17-member group can get through the level of detail and distill all of this. I want it to be obviously very interactive with the entire board, but we may have to think about a structure where a smaller group works with staff and consultants to really hone these scenarios and the alternatives to try and get something that we can all agree to. So just start to think about the kind of operating structure for us as we start to process all this work. With that, Kelly, you're up next with the bylaws.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to leave my camera off for now because I'm getting several indicators of my internet connection being poor, so hopefully that will help. So let me know at any point if you want me to repeat anything or if it's not coming through clearly. So the sections that we're going to be looking at this afternoon cover elections, employees, books and records, insurance, and then the district seal, which is our bonus section for today. So I'll start with the section number 11 on elections. This section is a little brief, but it does sort of memorialize what we've learned about elections and how the district will be conducting those once we get to a point of having elected directors as opposed to appointed, since I think 5 will be elected through the process in May. So our annual elections would be held every other year in odd numbered years on the 3rd Tuesday in May. And it would just follow the statute in terms of eligibility for those directors. And the district is not at this point authorized to hold special elections, which would be an election that is not on the 3rd Tuesday in May of odd years. So to the extent that that is needed in the future, that would require some kind of a legislative change.
And
Are there any?
Can I add something here, Kelly? This is Peggy.
Sure.
And I just want to add, this does impact as we move forward and are identifying our timing for the permanent board to take over, and our revenue structure is that this 3rd Tuesday in May in the odd years means 21, 23, 25. So that kind of puts some critical points as we move forward. If we don't make a 23 to get a revenue structure in place and operating, which means we'd have to have that revenue structure operating in probably November of 22, we would have to be looking at 25. So just a gentle reminder of this.
This is Shirley. I have a question.
Right, that's exactly right.
This is Shirley. I have a question. Just curious. So the elections for the board would be in May, and there's 5 positions. If there's not, does that mean there might possibly be a runoff of the top 2 in November?
That's a good question.
That is a great question. Yeah.
Great, yeah.
Because I could see more than 2 people running for a position.
Yeah.
I will look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions on this section? All right, I'm going to move on then to section 12 on employees. This section has a designated executive director position, which you have already appointed as Peggy. The language in this section is pretty well pulled directly from your current services IGA with the Joint Contracting Authority. And so it describes the position basically exactly the same. It does add that staff will report to the executive director to the extent that the district has staff. And so I think that's just pretty good basic practice to have kind of a chief executive of some kind associated with the district. The second position that we put in there is a district engineer position. This idea originates in the drainage district statute, which is ORS 547. So this is a position that is not dictated by the urban district statute. It's not in ORS 550, but we have felt like it's a good practice. It's kind of, from what I understand from Bill, this is a common position to have at various organizations. And it would be sort of more of the technical expert. This person would be able to make recommendations regarding infrastructure, regarding operations and maintenance, capital improvement, where investments should go, that sort of thing. And so the value of having this information, as well as a report put together for the boards at least once a year, on which the board can rely to do capital planning, and also for purposes of discretionary immunity, which is a defense if there is a claim for damages under the Oregon Tort Claims Act against the district. Then discretionary immunity is a situation where if the claim is based on performance by a public officer of a performance of a duty or failure to perform a duty, that this would be a defense that they acted within their discretionary immunity, their discretion to make those decisions, because you don't have all the money that you have at any given time to fix everything that needs to be fixed. And so this allows you to kind of make a reasonable plan to get, and so to the extent that something in that plan is the subject of a claim, then this would be a defense that you can use. But that's just a long way of saying that we see a lot of value in this district engineer position. But that said, it is drafted as a permissive position, so something that the district may consider putting in place. And in talking about it, we would recommend that this would be a position that's considered by the permanent board, just because it's not as relevant to what this board is considering now in terms of putting together a funding structure. So another reason that we left it as permissive. Are there
I have a question. This
questions
is Mike.
on? Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
The executive director, and if so, a district engineer, do they serve at the will of the board? That is, that they can be hired or fired at any time with cause?
Yes, these positions would be at the will of the board.
Okay.
Alternatively, the engineer could, be structured so that it goes under the executive director, but as it's drafted, these would be serving at the pleasure of the board. Other questions? All right, I'll move on to section 13 then on books and records, and thank you, Emily, for moving the slides for me. This books and records section is just kind of a standard bylaws clause. It's very standard language that just refers back to statutory requirements in terms of keeping books and records for public records purposes, and for making sure that all of our accounting is proper and is transparent and can be requested by anybody that wants to look at it. So that's just kind of standard, not really much to say on that section, unless there are questions.
Does the bylaw, do they refer at all to the archiving schedule from the state as far as retention?
It does not, but I can certainly make that addition. I think that would be a great addition.
And we are currently just, we as being the districts are currently putting together those we establish a records management or document management strategy and policy in place to make sure that we are aligned with the existing state requirements, et cetera.
Great.
Thank you. And so the next section is on insurance, and I added this section based on a conversation I think we had that maybe Mike or Eric raised this concern about having insurance be a required part of our operations. And so this section, it doesn't get into the specifics. I have seen bylaws where they specify types and amounts of insurance, but that's very subject to change, especially as the Tort Claims Act increases. So rather than trying to have our bylaws track those increases, it just states that the district would carry the type and amount of insurance that's typical for the type of activities that we're engaged in and the type of property that's owned by the district, as well as requiring that each year the premiums would be budgeted through the annual budget process.
So Kelly, I'm not sure if there's a legal requirement for the board to carry certain types of insurance. The general structure is three basic insurances: general liability, property damage, and workers' compensation. There are certainly other specialty insurances that lots of different governments carry, and but I'm not aware if there is a legal requirement to carry any of those other than perhaps workers' comp.
This is Hong. I can answer that. Yeah, workers' comp is the only one. Automobile, if we own automobile, obviously we should have that. In terms of general liability and another statute, Mike, we would follow, as most public entities do, sort of the gaps that are left by the Oregon Tort Claims Act. So we would just have coverage to cover the extent of that. And we would be working with the Special District Association to advise on what is a reasonable level of coverage, and through the broker there.
Great, that works.
I'd like to ask a question about the seal. You mean just a seal that you put on a letter? Is that what that's referring to?
Yeah. So.
Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah. So if we're done with the insurance section, then I'll move on to the seal. So this is something that's permitted by our statute. My understanding from Hong is that it's just kind of an old-fashioned way to authenticate documents. And so to the extent that the district is interested in putting that together, and it's permissive in the bylaws and it's permissive in the statute, so certainly not something that has to be pursued, but we kind of thought that might be something to look at through the process of the mission, vision, values that you're about to embark on.
Well, we're actually gonna have one with Reed Wagner's face on it. in a lifetime supply of wax to seal all of our documents with. So.
Well, Mike, you'll have to negotiate a permanent license of his face then.
Yeah.
He might be charging us a per usage fee.
It won't be worth
royalties.
Okay.
Well, this is Mike number 2. I read somewhere in the documents about hiring a consultant to pick the insurance. I don't think that's a good use of money. Not when CIS is used probably by most all jurisdictions around, and they've proven themselves.
CIS is whom?
City Insurance Service.
So we wouldn't be using CIS. We would be using somebody similar to that. It's through SDAO, and we have a broker that is retained to purchase those policies from SDAO.
And that's the Special Districts Association.
Yes, special. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, we would be working with the Special District Association to advise us on the scope and coverage and risks commensurate with the type of special district that you are, noting that this is a very unique district in Oregon. So we can do no wrong.
Good. It's good to be special.
Yeah, we can do no wrong. I haven't heard that one in a long time. Okay. What's
All right,
next?
that's all I have.
So where are
Oh,
we?
here's I guess the schedule. So next month we'll be considering the financial management section, which will cover some basic financial and accounting sort of principles and contracts and who can sign what kind of things. And as well as other suggestions from prior meetings, I'm going to be bringing back some changes and some additions based on our prior conversations. And then ideally at the December meeting, we'll be adopting the full set of bylaws.
Great. Any questions of Kelly before we move on to the contracting overview?
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Sunny?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sunny Simpkins, and I'm one of the deputy directors over at MCDD and oversee contracting and procurement. So I'm going to talk to you about that this afternoon. So we all have the goal of getting the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District off the ground and running with a sustainable revenue source coming up. And to do that, staff has identified kind of 6 contracts that we need to bring in outside consultings or outside costs to do this work. So, so I wanted to go over these immediate needs that we're looking at. So the first one, they're shown on the slides up on your screen. The first one is insurance. And that is, just to clarify, I guess, based on a question that just came up a minute ago, is it's not consulting on insurance, it's specifically our insurance policy. So we've estimated around $2,300 a year for that. Right now, based on recommendations with our broker and the Special Districts Association organization of Oregon, we're just carrying crime. And that just protects you in case, say, one of the staff members here at the district's embezzled money or something like that. We do anticipate adding some policies as we start doing more work, potentially something like automobile insurance once we come out of COVID and need to have meetings. But initially, we're just going to carry this crime policy. The next cost is the financial database development.
Excuse me, Sunny. Just for the sake of the board's context perspective, how much is the annual premium, if somebody here knows, for MCDD for its activities? Does anybody know how much the overall insurance premium is per year?
I could look it up after we.
I can do, yeah, we can do that. We can provide that.
It will just give the board a sense of context for where we're headed as we become a more full service entity.
Yeah, and it's kind of at the end. I think by the end of the meeting, we could have that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then, yeah, the next work we need to do is the financial database development. So currently the districts use AccuFund, which is a module-based accounting system. So we just need to bring in an outside consultant and contractor to build a new module to manage this money. The next service is an auditor. We're required by the state to do an audit every year. And as we set up all these financial decisions, we also want to have a CPA on contract to advise us. Right now, the districts don't adhere to public budget law, so it's really important that we have somebody to help us make some of these decisions and navigate these new rules with public budget law. So that what that auditor would be for.
So, Sunny, the 8,000 to 10,000 will actually be for the auditor contract, or will it be for his CPA to advise us on building the database, building the structure of the accounting?
Yeah, so the financial database development, we'll build that structure, like the accounting string and those type of decisions in that line item. And then the auditor line item will be consulting with us about kind of applying that string and making those decisions.
So will it actually be the auditor?
It won't be them doing the audit work. We anticipate having the same CPA do our audit report as they're providing our advice as we're setting up the system.
So it will be next year, July 1st. This will be the contract that actually does our audit.
So we'll have to have a separate contract for the audit because they will audit the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, the 40,000 budget line item, versus this contract will be consulting where we can talk to them to get ready, ready for next year and the budgeting this year. And so they will be helping advise us administering the business organ contract.
So currently the 4 districts are not required to do a financial audit. Is that correct?
We are required to do it in the districts that exceed $500,000 in expenditures.
So all 4 districts are currently required to have audits.
Yeah, we do we'll do a abbreviated audit report for the smaller ones and then a full audit for the larger ones.
And you have a contractor that does that?
Correct, yes.
Outside auditor.
Mm-hmm.
And has anybody spoken with that auditor about potentially using that contract for the audit?
We have.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay. And
they're interested in providing the service. Yeah.
I'm sure they are. And would it be inappropriate for them to advise us on the construction of our chart of accounts?
They do not believe so, that there is not a conflict. Oh, actually, let me clear up. The financial database development is a different consultant than the auditor.
I understand.
So yeah, so they won't be giving us the chart of accounts setup.
Wouldn't we want our auditors to advise us on the chart of accounts?
You could follow up with them to talk through that.
Okay, maybe I'm confused. So we can talk more.
Okay. And I think where the auditor, the CPA comes in, is just more like, I'm trying to think of a good example versus of what we would ask them.
Our question to any of the auditor over the next 8 months, whatever it's going to be, is really to help make sure, are we tracking things appropriately? We can set up our chart of accounts. They will be through 2 different consultants that we're using right now for the financial database development, which takes into account the software program we're putting in place and takes into account helping us to set up a chart of accounts that makes sense for this new district. And the auditor will be used to help I look at it as more consulting services through this year, which is not going to be a lot, but to make sure we're not taking a bad step as we move forward. And then helping us to conduct the audit for this year, starting in July.
That sounds like what I was trying to say. I appreciate it.
Yeah. See, the next service would be for the mission, vision, values, and Peggy and Evan are going to talk through that a little later in the meeting. But right, those will be kind of the North Star and the guiding post for how we do this work in the future. We've got revenue development.
I was just going to say, I really have a problem with the $20,000 on that. A big problem.
And so, Mike, what's your problem?
Well, I think that just is a too high of an estimate on what it would cost. I don't see, from my experience, it should be about half that.
Okay, well, I'm sure if we can get a competent consultant at half that, we'd probably do that if we could.
Yeah. And
okay, I bet they'll be there.
I mean, it's just an estimate, right?
It's an estimate, number one, and number two, we'll talk a little bit more about the content of that mission, vision, value, the scope of work shortly.
Yeah.
Or maybe it can help to answer some questions for you, Mike.
That'd be good.
Okay, sure.
And then we've got revenue development, which is the largest chunk of work coming up, which will be bringing on a consultant to help us look at and evaluate all the alternatives there are to bring in financial resources to the district. And finally, we've got public outreach that we plan on doing in January and February of next year. And just as a reminder, public outreach is a requirement of the business organ grant. And also as we meet with other districts around the country that are either themselves just newly formed or taking on large capital projects, public outreach is the #1 advice we get for us to budget and start working on early and often. So with this list of services, we've determined that all this work qualifies for to be funded by the Oregon Business Grant, which is administered through the Joint Contracting Authority, or known as the JCA. And the JCA has adopted contracting rules already. And so today, really what we wanted to talk through with the board and get concurrence on is that we would use those adopted rules to procure these 6 services in the immediate time frame. We plan on bringing a more robust and having a larger robust discussion about contracting in Q1 of next year, so that this board can understand those rules and put its own fingerprint on how they want to go through contracting. But at this time, because of the immediate needs, we'd like to use those adopted rules. And so I'll turn it over to see if there's any questions out there.
I just want to be clear, Sunny or Hong, did I hear you say that you want to move forward on these procurements under the current rules that MCDD or the JCA uses?
Correct.
For contracting? Okay.
So the clarification is that these contracts will be entered into by the Joint Contracting Authority as the contracting party and contracting authority, because they are procuring services that are essential to this new district. We wanted to just give this district information about what those contracts are and seek your concurrence because they support what you do. But administratively, it will be the JCA that's going to run the procurement, enter the contracts, and negotiate with Peggotty signing off on those contracts on behalf of the JCA for you all. How are we feeling about that?
Okay, Mary Helen?
I think you just answered my question, but it is who's going to decide? Because it sounds like there's people that have questions about, is this the best way to go with a contract? So JCA will make the decision?
Yes, the JCA will, I think the best way to approach this is because the money is coming from the business organ, it has to be in the name of the JCA as a contracting entity and contracting party. Now, to the extent that there's concern over the scope of work, that is something that we would be, I would advise Peggotty and Sunny to seek concurrence as we're doing here with the board on the scope of work for these various elements before Peggotty is able to execute on those contracts in the name of the JCA. So this board, because the work supports this board, it is essential to have this board on board and have concurrence from this board for the work that is being pursued. But in terms of the administrative implementation of the procurement and contracting and negotiation, it would be through the JCA.
Okay. I guess, well, I can say this. My concern is, and I'm sure there's other people on this board have been there, done that several times. And you get into the, I know a person, I do I know this, and it's for me as a citizen, I've sat through too many committees where everybody has a better idea. And so I guess it's, my concern is that we have a body, and it sounds like the JCA that we've entrusted with making this decision based on our input. Because it could turn into a nightmare with 17 different opinions. I don't know how many jurisdictions, what, 15? And I think that we, need to entrust and might be a little too religious, but let go and let God be the JCA in this instance.
And that would entirely be a decision by the board to make,
Okay.
and well within the discretion of this board to make.
Okay.
But this board shouldn't be too concerned about the legality of the procurement and the implementation of the contracting aspect of it, because it will be handled by staff through the authorities of the JCA.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just going to add one more thing, and that is, it is our intent all along, just like we're talking a little bit about the mission, vision, value RFP, is to keep this board informed of the process. And as we set up committees, they'll be involved with maybe helping those scopes of work, so we're ensure that we are reflecting the needs of the board. But legally, we work through the JCA because they hold the money.
So, Sunny, or you can probably answer this. The revenue development is going to be $150,000, or it's estimated to be that. Under section 3B, subsection I, the total amount payable by the JCA under the individual JCA contract does not exceed $100,000. Who actually has to sign off on that? Because under 100,000, Peggy can do that. But since it's over 100,000, who has to?
So we would seek through the current working with the JCA, we would be seeking a resolution from the JCA board to either execute on that contract by the board president or delegate that authority to sign to Peggy. So that is a precautionary measure to allow the governing body to sign off on really high value contracts, and high value contracts for our district is anything above that amount, Eric.
Right, and that would be done by the JCA board, not by us.
Correct.
Got it.
Can I just make one more comment and then I'll be quiet? But this is not a paid endorsement, but I think through the whole experience the whole Levy Ready Columbia, dealing with staff, JCA, and that process, it worked beautifully. And so I guess as a old timer, long timer, for the new people, the experience has been solid. And I think that we need to recognize that as experience as well, that good decisions and actions were taken. So.
Other questions right now?
Yeah, I had a question. This is Commissioner Stegman. So I'm assuming this 204,000 to 246 is in our budget. Like, how does this match up to the budget that we've been talking about?
It aligns with a budget that we have developed up to now.
Okay, so it's already been, it's in our budget.
You'll be seeing after the Levy Ready Columbia IGA group amends their budget to make the payment that we talked about last month to add, I can't remember the exact number. I think it was $220,000.
123,000.
123. It might work, but I'm sure it's sitting at a 123.
Well, whatever they approve, then to amend their budget, then we would have to come back and formally amend our budget.
Correct.
Spend those monies. And I guess what I would like to see, and I fully agree with Mary Helen, I think that our track record with the JCA through the entire kind of collaborative effort of the 4 districts and the LRC has been a good history. So I'm not questioning any of that. I think for the sake of the board, a level of transparency regarding the scope of work for each contract and how those scopes either mesh or don't with each other. So for instance, I don't know how the public outreach contract scope matches up with mission, vision, values, and with revenue development. Both of those processes probably will have a public involvement component. So understanding how the scopes relate to each other, not necessarily for a big debate, but so it's very transparent for this board what we're contracting for with each of these contracts. And it's clear that would just be my hope. And of course, as they move through the procurement process, it would be great to have just an update to this board about where these contracts are in the procurement process. And I realize we're going to talk about one of those today with mission, vision, values, and start to flesh that out. So I'm fully supportive of using the JCA, fully am happy with the history there. This is a new board, and having a transparency with this board for each of these contracts would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, and just again, this is the reason why we're going through the JCA primarily is because we are trying to optimize the Business Oregon grant. When this board receives additional money from the LRC, you will have a bigger budget. And then to the extent that you have contracts that you need to contract using that money, we will be talking, as Sunny alluded to earlier, about contracting rules for this board in particular, as specifically applied to this board, acting as its own contracting agency and as a contracting party using its money. So that will be taken up later, but because these were immediate needs and we had a financial source, we thought this was the most expeditious process to get through on these contracts.
I appreciate that. I fully agree with you. In fact, when we amend the budget and we have money that is not subject to the statute that has to go through the JCA, I might advocate for all the money to be contracted through the JCA. Seems like an efficient process, but that's the board's decision, obviously. Another question, where will our procurement rules reside? Will they be in the bylaws?
No, they will be, we will adopt them as a set of rules through resolution and ordinance, yes.
Thank you. Other questions about this?
I have one. The sort of reiterating what you just said, that we will have additional insights into the scope, but I do have a question about the January, February public outreach and how it relates to the public outreach component of mission, vision, values. At the same time, I think there's public outreach within the LRC budget still, and then there's public outreach going on in the Army Corps process. So some of this is just a financial issue of making sure we're maximizing value, but I also want to be mindful of not overly confusing the public. I think this is it will take skilled communicators, I think, to do this work. And anyways, on a good day, I can keep it straight. So I guess at some point I would like some more clarity on sort of the assorted streams of public outreach that are going on and how best to manage that.
And I'm glad you brought it up because that is our goal as well. The last thing we want to do is confuse the public. We want to be able to lead them along and build trust with them over time without overtaxing, because a lot of people are also overtaxed, and getting that balance of sharing information and receiving information. So thank you, Ian.
Evan, did you want to comment on this? No.
I think I can wait till the mission, vision, values.
Okay. Well,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate the comment, Ann. My only response is the public should have the right to be as confused as I am.
Done.
All right.
So, Evan?
Yeah, hi. My name is Evan Mitchell. I am the Levy Ready Columbia Communications and Public Affairs Manager, and I have been working with Peggotty and Colin and other folks on the Mission Vision Values RFP that was put in front of you all today. In your packets, you received basically 2 scopes of work, and while it doesn't reflect the full RFP, we wanted to really highlight the part that we thought was important for the board to consider and ask you some specific questions. So to kind of take a step backwards, the reason that we're putting this in front of you first is we think that the mission, vision, values process is really important and foundational to the work of this board, the work of the district, and sort of setting up a guiding principles for all of us going forward. And so even though the legislation does sort of detail, it outlines a general mission for the district, there's a lot more that comes out of a mission, vision, values process. Plus, it gives us an opportunity to go out and talk to the community about some of these really kind of key foundational pieces of the work and to get public input. We came up with 2 different scopes because we understand that, you know, time and money are very important. We thought about what would one look like that is really more internally focused, that is the board, you know, kind of the board making decisions. And then we thought about a process that was more generally kind of co-created between the board, MCDD staff, key stakeholders, and other community representatives. And that's why that range on the dollar figure was so broad, was you could do that in a number of different ways. And it, you know, depending on some preferences of this board. Obviously, a process that facilitates a couple of discussions with the boards to develop this is not a $20,000, $30,000 process, but something that is more extensive, that takes the time to go out and talk to the community about, you know, what the board is discussing could cost more, especially during this time when, you know, we're having to be really, really intentional. We can't just have a public meeting and have people show up, nor, you know, since equity is a driving force for this district, you know, we need to think about how we do that outreach and who the voice and whose voices are elevated as we do that outreach. So we have a couple of questions to put out for this board to discuss. You know, one key one is, in establishing your mission, vision, values, how important is it to you all to take, you know, maybe a couple of, probably 6 to 8 extra weeks to do some community outreach? We would really ask that, you know, the consultant that we hired design that. We would look to the contractors to come up with a meaningful process that involves community outreach and how that input gets embedded back in. I don't want to guess at what precisely that would be yet, because my hope as a staff member would be that we'd be looking at elevating, you know, kind of the voices of folks who have been historically left out of decisions around the floodplain and the management of this infrastructure. And so we would really need to look for a consultant who could help, you know, who has strong relationships in some of the communities of color, who could help us design and do some of that outreach. The other questions that we have for you are around, so that's the big one. The other ones are kind of about your general feeling around the scope and board participation in the process, in terms of, you know, do you want to review proposals? Do you want to sit in on interviews? So I think, Mike, if we want to kind of have a conversation, I'll turn it back over to you to kind of help the board have that discussion.
Thank you, Evan.
Yeah.
So maybe just a comment before I open it up for folks to think about this. I think it is a very good idea for in this board in its kind of infancy, if you will, to take the time to think through some of these fundamental questions about what's our purpose and where are we going and what do we value and why do we exist? Why are we here? And one could draw a conclusion about those things from just the words of the statute. But I think, and I think most people believe, that a local government entity thinks about what its mission and its values are, that involves more than the fundamental words on some charter or some authorizing document, that it's a relationship issue with those who are being governed. And so I think most of the question here is not whether we should do this or not. The question is how we do it. And I want to make a point for not wasting money, but I don't want to be cheap about engaging the public early and setting a tone for how this district will operate through time. I think it is incredibly critical that we set that kind of precedential way of behaving vis-a-vis the public and stakeholders in this district. I'll make one last pitch for that, and that is sometime 1 to 2 years from now, I think, this board will make a decision to form some kind of utility to raise the money to do this work. I want to remind the board that that is a referable act. It can go to the public for a vote, even if you don't want it to. So I think trying to set the stage for a really productive, open, transparent relationship with stakeholders and the public from the very beginning, right through up until the time we look to adopt a utility fee and turn this board over to an elected group. I think this engagement is going to set the stage for how successful we are for the next couple of years. So sorry for
Mike,
but
thank you, Mike. And that reminded me that I didn't actually address Anne's question from earlier about the public outreach.
Okay.
So the way that we've sort of been envisioning this is obviously the revenue development work is going to require the heaviest amount of outreach over a prolonged period of time. We don't yet know exactly what that's going to look like, but I do know that there'll be a consultant that's getting up and running and developing that process. And so one of the things that we talked about internally as we were developing this list of contractors was, at what point do we start engaging the public around the revenue development? The reality is, I don't think it'll be January or February of this coming year, but we may start talking about what it looks like and what type of consultant we need in this to hire by the end of this fiscal year to start that work. The mission, vision, values has its own public outreach embedded in it in the scope that we put in front of folks today. With all of our outreach efforts for this district, I think it's going to be fundamental that we think about how much engagement we do before this district has, let's say, a name that somebody can remember so that we're not having to redo the education over and over. Because the mission, vision, values is so critical and foundational, we think it's worth doing some outreach around it, some for the educational value and to get that input, set the precedent. But then really, I see this work being directly connected with naming this district, coming up with our logo, if we have to have a seal, coming up with the seal, so that then, you know, we can build our future public outreach off of that. So I don't know if it's a perfect answer, but that's what those two line items are. Levy Ready Columbia's public outreach budget is primarily focused on engaging folks around the Army Corps feasibility study this fiscal year. And for I think it's in this board's best interest for that to remain separate for the time being, to continue to do that outreach where it is currently housed
Through the LRC.
through the LRC and through the drainage districts. At some point, we all become merged and we'll all be responsible for the same stuff. But for now, that money has been, set aside and prioritized by LRC and the drainage districts. If that makes sense.
It does, but so let me just make sure I'm clear then. The 15 to 25 that was on that list of contracts, then the idea of that particular outreach would be in concert with the revenue development.
That's the current
not
thinking.
happening in January and February, but it may happen this fiscal year. Okay. And the other question to you, Evan, then, is it your role to have eyeballs on all of this outreach that's going on under whatever, whether it's LRC or new district, so that you're aware of, oh, we shouldn't hold that community gathering right now on revenue development because it's a week before the Army Corps' next milestone or something. I mean, I'm just like making it up, but someone is aware of
I will intercede right here, Ann, and say the staff works cohesively to make sure we're not double hitting the public. We do a process that ensures there's continuity to the public, but also that we're not stepping on each other. All of it is being coordinated through the district, through our public outreach, which includes Karen Carrillo and also Evan.
Great, thanks.
This may be too soon to start asking these questions, but I mean, do you have a thought about how you're going to go about this? Because this district is much larger. It's all of Multnomah County within Metro's urban growth boundary. And then there's some people that are going to have a lot more interest in this than others. Those businesses, people that live, near the levee, than those of us that live further away. So I assume that you have kind of thought some of this. I'm really curious about how you're going to go about this, because it's the stakeholders, the customers all will look at this a little bit differently because we all have a little bit different interest in it.
Yeah, and I think the one piece we've actually talked about, Shirley, is recognizing those conversations are going to be contingent upon what the audience benefits from, because that conversation is going to be steered by what, as we all know, people tend to think when you have public meetings, they're looking out from Fremont, which is absolutely appropriate for them. And our goal is to make sure when we're reaching out that we're outlining the benefits for them as we move forward.
And then I assume you're going to be looking at this from a perspective of the BIPOC community, the Native Americans. They're going to look at this differently too, on just where this levee resides, right on the Columbia River. And so there's that piece of this too.
Absolutely. Others, I've got just a few minutes left on this topic, so got to move us along. Mike?
I just say I concur with everything. I really stress the public involvement, and I don't know how that takes place again in a virtual reality. My real concern is I keep hearing a lot is the word where you hire a consultant. And I really have an aversion to just the constant use of consultants. I think that should be something looked at really critically. That's all I have to say.
I appreciate that.
Evan and Mike, in terms of the output from this, are you looking for this community engagement as input or buy-in to a document that's already been vetted by the board?
speaking for myself and what I've been talking about with staff internally, I think that we need to ask, the reason that I'm encouraging a consultant is because we don't have somebody on staff who has the capacity or expertise to design and run this process. We'd like to bring somebody on who can help us design the process so that we are getting meaningful input at multiple stages along the development. So it isn't just a simply, here's a document that the board came up with and has already approved. Here it is for public information, or here it is, we hope you like it. I mean, I think it needs to be a meaningful dialogue. And so we need to design the whole process that way.
Right, and so you would have public input to this from the outset on, there's part of the mission which is given under the statute, but are there other things that should be part of the mission? And then I get concerned about just leaving it too open-ended because that leads to particularly non-productive discussions. And so you may want to do this at multiple points through your process, but that will be part of what the 3 or 4 or 5 different consulting groups come back to with as an RFP to establish what are the core values and what's the vision for this.
And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And in my mind, we're directly connecting this work to your work of creating a revenue structure. We want the output to be able to support everything you do in the next steps to create the revenue structure.
Got it. Thank you.
I think that these consultants better come up with a really hot looking a seal of some kind. I mean, something really good. Earn their money. Just a joke.
Got it.
We do have the environmental community we got to keep in mind too.
Yes.
Mary Helen, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I do. I think that, and I think Evan's aware of this, but I've lived in the drainage district in a neighborhood, Penn 2, and I have neighbors that don't even have an idea that there's a drainage district. They don't have an idea that what the difference is between Levy Ready Columbia, the new urban district, what's going to happen to Penn 2. And then I have people that are so deep in the weeds that they want to know, how high is embankment going to be when they do the remediation work? And so to me, it's not going to be an easy process. But if we try to lump it all together, people aren't going to get it. And as all those people that I spoke to public comment before, there's always going to be the people that don't agree. It doesn't matter, and that's a given, and they have a God-given right to do that. But I think we also need to include the history of success, that these are the things that have been accomplished. These are the outstanding things that have occurred that, people don't understand and should appreciate that it only took a year to get a special district when sometimes it's taken 7 years. And I think if we, and I don't know that well, but I say to people at the port that I know, we need to toot our own horn and say there's been a lot of success, so that they have some sort of place, that the public has some sort of place where they can put their trust. And that started out because somebody started an argument or made something up. But I think the critical part is going to be able to separate Levy Ready Columbia, JCA, and why we're where we are now. You talk to people in Alameda or Sunnyside neighborhood or even Cully, and they have there's very many. And I think Evan was at one of the citywide land use meetings where land use experts from around the city didn't even know there was a levy, had no idea what it was. So those things I think need to be addressed before we start throwing technical terms about financial plans and really complicated. And because otherwise, they had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had a session out at the Expo Center, and people were disagreeing about how many people were there. Were there 100 there? Were there 125? That shouldn't be the point of discussion. It should be what they're doing. So I just, and it came from not having trust in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So if we can convince people that this group, this board is representative of jurisdictions that have had trust in this process for 7 years, I think we'll be miles ahead.
Thank you, Mary Helen. So I need to move us to the next topic. We're a little bit over time. So we're going to get informed of these procurements as we move forward. Evan, on the mission, vision, values RFP, it's in front of everybody, so we all know what it is. And we've had some discussion. Do you need anything more from us regarding moving through the JCA, through the RFP process?
I'm looking to see if Peggotty makes any head facial,
Oh, no.
any.
I think we have what we needed. Our big concern was, was it going to be an inward process or an outward facing process? It's very clear from the direction we got from the board here that there is going to be a combination of work internally and getting feedback from the public through the process. So those were our big, and we will, as this goes out, we will be keeping the board informed of what the process could be.
And I guess we've had a conceptual discussion today. As you bring on consulting help, my hope would be that they come here and we actually talk in detail about what their recommendation is and how we can mold that so it fits the intent of the board. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds very reasonable.
All right. I'm gonna move us on, gang, because we're a little behind. Colin, I think you're up next with the state grant and how the spending is going. And is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Hi, Colin Rowan here again on a more prosaic topic. I just wanted to give you all an update on our $500,000 grant from Business Oregon through the state and the spend to date. And then I think I must have preempted the technical issues. There is a slide that I'll share that has sort of what the projected spend over the next few months looks like. And I added it to the slideshow instead of switching over to the spreadsheet that it lives in so that we won't have any kerfuffles. And then I did want to give a quick update on a couple competitive FEMA grants that we are pursuing that will help buy down what the overall modernization cost that would go into the revenue analysis looks like. So very quickly, right now we are spending about $11,000 per month, so almost all in staff time, and that fits with what we had projected around the burn rate. Imagine that it's going to go up a little bit to about $12,000 per month. And the total spend, which is basically from April and through the end of August, is the latest output from our financials, is about $54,000 in total. And that shows a pretty linear increase starting from about $5,000 a month, and now we're up to about $11,000. And we'll actually be doing more work in the coming months, but we'll be supported by additional staff. So we're in the process, and hopefully in end of this month or in November, we'll be hiring a board coordinator position. We'll also be hiring a part-time or 0.5 FTE, not part-time, but 0.5 FTE for this board finance specialist to help support these efforts. The administrative costs are projected to increase largely due to the need to prepare these additional contracts, managing the different consultants, and to move a lot of the work forward will be most likely putting together some different committees. So staffing and prepping those committees will take a good bit of time. Just quick update for that.
Could I
Sorry,
ask?
was there a question? Please.
I just had a question I wanted to ask. Our spend to date has been to reimburse MCDD staff, basically, correct? Since we have no staff of our own.
In large part, correct, as well as some legal costs.
There you go.
Okay, and going forward, the administrative costs are projected to increase because we will have our own staff and they will have work to do, right?
Those staff.
Do
Yes.
we expect the MCDD staff workload to fall off a bit because we will add our own staff doing some of the things that MCDD staff have been doing?
I don't believe so. I think there's a lot more work to be done, and not just from the administrative part, but also just managing the different contracts and the large pieces of work around mission, vision, values, and the revenue analysis. So that will keep a lot of MCDD, the current MCDD staff working. And just a point of clarification is that the board coordinator position, the 0.5 FTE, the finance specialist, all the staff will continue to be MCDD staff. So it's similar to how MCDD staff provides the staffing for the other drainage districts. The new Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District efforts will basically be MCDD staff. That will be, the new board will be reimbursing MCDD staff for that time.
Okay.
This is Shirley. I have a question. So as we move forward in this fiscal year, we're drawing off this 500,000 from the legislature, Business Oregon. Is that the right group?
Yeah.
Name of the group. So I guess I would like to see some kind of a graph, a bar chart or something to show us how we're using, how comparing to the total funds we have available, how we're using these funds. Because I know we're very limited on our ability, we don't have any other sources of funding to keep track of how well we're managing this $500,000. And then at some point, when will we make a decision about the next fiscal year, since that's more tenuous, where that money comes from, and be able to keep this seamless and be able to keep moving on the work of the organization?
So for the first question, and actually, Emily, it makes sense. Would you please move to the next slide? So this is obviously, it's not pretty, but this is a projected spending spreadsheet that we use. So I'll be able to walk through this. The budget line items match up both to what is in that $500,000 grant, as well as your $40,000 adopted budget. And then right now, it also includes the potential $123,000 from Levy Ready Columbia. The second part of your question, Councilor Craddock, Tanny Stephenson will talk through a little bit about, kind of this $500,000 grant from the state ends on June 30th. And, that we really do need to look forward to next fiscal year and how to pay for that. And I think I jumped in, and Peggy, I think I stopped you from saying something. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think we are projecting a spend to date. Projected spend for FY21, and then we will be providing the spend to date on a monthly basis to provide an idea of where we are, actuals versus budgeted. Is that getting at what you want, Shirley?
Yes, no, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
I think it will be helpful for all of us as we move forward. And I will concur with Colin with the issue of talking about next year is a serious matter.
Okay, Colin, keep moving.
Okay, so very quickly, there's obviously a lot in this sheet, but it shows where we anticipate the board coordinator, budget analyst, the different positions could be coming online and how that will affect the budget. And then it also shows some of the actual project work that needs to be done. And so what you see is an increase in overall staff effort really beginning in November, where you have both additional staff coming in to support, as well as the continued work of the existing MCDD staff that work on this. And so the rest of these pieces, I don't think I really need to dive too far into. One thing to highlight is of that revenue model consulting, the $150,000 piece of work, the expectation and what we had budgeted for earlier was $85,000 of that to take place this fiscal year. And that and all the other ones, if those numbers change or any of our expectations change, we'll definitely provide an update to the board.
And our goal with the revenue model is because it does straddle more than 1 year. And with the uncertainty of the revenue flow for next year, that we're going to develop it in a way that kind of has a phase 1, phase 2, so that we're not promising more than we can pay for at any one time.
So,
Emily, okay, sorry.
Or Colin, is kind of a projection chart? Are we able to get this kind of month to month to update? I guarantee you your projections will be wrong. I can't tell you which way, but they'll be wrong. So I would like to make sure that the board can get an update. I don't know that it needs to be much more detailed than this for the whole board, but as we move forward, actuals against budget and with projections to the end of the year, that would be really helpful, I think, for everybody.
That is our intent, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll just try to catch us back up. I'll be very brief, but there are 2 large grant opportunities that we're pursuing through FEMA's BRIC program, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, which is a new grant program that is pretty tailor fit to the existing districts as well as the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. So we hope that FEMA continues to fund the program. It's really focused on building, well, it's in the name, building resilient infrastructure, and it's not focused on what FEMA has done in the past, which is either sort of reactive funding or any of the hazard mitigation, largely being focused on small kind of parcel level infrastructure versus infrastructure and projects. So one application was submitted for a certification project that is in the city of Fairview. It's on Marine Drive near Northeast 223rd Avenue. It's about a $13.5 million project, and it is a pretty interesting project that we were able to scope out that would both protect the function of the levee, but it would actually claw back a bunch of the soil that's on the levee embankment, put down an impermeable or harder layer, and then put soils back on so that burrowing animals, beavers, not the nutria, which are invasive, but beavers would be able to reuse that area for their dens without undermining the levee. So we're moving forward. We got ranking from the state hazard mitigation officer of a third statewide out of about 20 projects that applied for this. So that means we get to provide the full application. And then we're working right now with the Bureau of Environmental Services and with Parks and Recreation for City of Portland to put together a pre-application for a pump station replacement in the western part of the district at Peninsula Drainage District number 1. That's about a $3.8 to $5 million project. So this is just to highlight that there are opportunities for grant funding for some of these large capital loans and or projects, and we'll continue pursuing them, which will buy down what the overall cost needs are for the district.
Hey, Colin, can you take us through a little bit of your reasoning behind selecting the PIR pump? Because we need repairs done on Schmier Road and 13th as well. Why was this considered the highest priority by the staff?
Thanks, Eric. So this, we are actually in a pretty interesting place as far as how FEMA applications work. The applicant to FEMA is the state, and sub-applicants to the state have to have a FEMA-approved natural hazard mitigation plan. Currently, the City of Portland has a natural hazard mitigation plan, and the county has a natural hazard mitigation plan. The drainage districts are not annexed in or party to either of those, but we are in the process of being annexed into the counties. So without having that natural hazard mitigation plan, we basically have to ask a sub-applicant to apply for us. This particular project, PIR, is identified in Peninsula Drainage District number 1's capital improvement plan, their 5-year plan. It is hugely beneficial to that district, and it also is pretty beneficial to the city as a sub-applicant. So it's a good match both between sub-applicant and us as the drainage districts who are asking for them to apply on our behalf.
So was it the city's choice to do it at PIR or the staff's?
Well, the city would be applying, but these are we needed to find projects that had a nexus between the sub-applicant and us as the drainage districts. And so in future years, when we have natural hazard mitigation plans, which we're hoping for next year, we'll actually have those annexed in, we'll be able to do those applications by district.
Okay, so am I correct in assuming from that the city chose to do the PIR replacement over the other ones at Schmier Road or 13th?
No, so we provided a number of projects that had a nexus with the City of Portland, such as being on City of Portland land or benefiting city projects, or actually being directly connected to the natural hazard mitigation plan. And so PIR, this pump station, is the best fit for that. Those ones in Pen 2 are on Pen 2 property, and so there's it's a different, the nexus isn't there, I guess.
Can I just add one little thing too? I don't know, little, but
because we got to keep moving.
Okay, I'll be quick. PBEM also has a very big interest in the pump station at PIR because of obvious emergency management treatment in that area. So I know they've been involved with the city and advocating for that for some time. So.
Okay, so I'm going to move us to Tanny and the budget shortfall.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. The committee met last week, and as you know, we are requesting $122,000 in additional funds from LRC, along with the 40 we got from the drainage districts, 500 from the state. And that gets us to $662,000, and we spent quite a bit of that today. But the The 662 is going to get us through this year. And we're looking at next year. And a couple of things, we are planning on going to the state, asking for 2 million for each year, the biennium. And if that doesn't work, we need a backup plan. And we are looking at a line of credit possibly to handle some of our operational needs in the interim basis until we have the permanent revenue in place. Questions?
Sounds good.
Okay.
So, and folks, I know some of you are well aware of how the legislature works. This next January, February, they'll go into long session. They'll be looking to create the next biennial budget. That biennial budget will be based on the revenue forecast that will come out in mid-May. The legislature will have lots of hearings and there'll be lots of discussion, but I guarantee you there will be no guarantee of any money for these districts until after the May forecast, which means we'll be within a month and a half of the end of the fiscal year, even if we're successful. And it's likely that it won't be in a bill that gets passed until mid-June. And so I think the committee and Tanny have discussed the fact that there needs to be a fallback position if we're not successful, and we need to start working on that today. We'll work on the legislation for sure. We just can't be sure that we'll be successful probably until mid-spring, maybe even late spring. So that's the approach we're taking right now.
Clarification regarding the request from the Levy Ready Columbia. Those are the partner agencies like Metro, et cetera. Have they already been approached? I haven't taken any action yet, but are staff working with staff in each of the agencies?
It was discussed at the last LRC board meeting, and the plan was to take action at the November LRC board meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do behind the scenes. I just need to make sure I give a heads up to staff about this. I'll talk to Peggy.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tanny.
You're welcome.
Can I add just one other thing on that? And it's just that if even starting to go after a line of credit today, even if we started this very moment, we're not going to see something materialize until probably March or April or even May. So I want people to know we are starting that process. We had a pretty good discussion with Tanny's leadership on kind of how to approach it and who to approach through this effort. So we will keep you in the loop as we get more information.
Well, you're next up, Peggy, so.
Okay, and I have to make it quick, right? As you know, I'm Peggy Yates, Executive Director, and I wanted to, I feel I'm kind of the thread that connects and staff with this new district and our existing districts. And so I take my role as really being able to provide information back and forth. That does not preclude the members on your existing board who are representing those districts, which includes Mary Helen, Corky, James, and Tanny. So, but my goal is to try and bring information back that you can use and be aware of. On that note, I wanted to let you all know that on October 28th, from 5:30 to 7:30, we are doing a community outreach via Zoom with the presentation of the core on the optimization effort on the feasibility study. And that optimization will include issues as it relates to public well, we'll go through public comment. We'll talk about what the core has identified as modifications and optimization. Some of that information has to be shared with the districts themselves, but until the core releases it, we do not want to get ahead of our skis. We will be using Kearns and West in that process to provide the public. It's going to be, as I said, through Zoom, but it provides the public an opportunity to ask questions. And we will be keeping a record of it and recording it. So it'll be available for the public that can't make it that night. Individuals that also can dial in on phone to get information. But this is kind of our first step in reaching out. It will be facilitated by Kearns and West. I wanted you all to be aware of what we were doing. In addition, just wanted to give you an update that we anticipate that the core is going to be coming to us in February, us being the local sponsors of the 4 districts, for a letter of support to move the project forward, to take it to headquarters for a final decision by headquarters, at which we will probably receive in October of 21, so a year from today. But I wanted to keep that on your radar screen. If anybody wants to participate, that information is up on our website. I also wanted to let you know the drainage districts. Yes.
Is it possible for you guys to send the record of that hearing to all of this board?
I think we can.
Thank you.
And if you could send us by email the information, that would be helpful too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Peggotty, is there any plan to reach out to the groups that were all on the joint letter raising concerns about this process? Because we still haven't heard anything, and there's a lot of groups that weighed in, took the time to write extensive comments, and there's been zero outreach back to them at this point. And so it's great that you're going out to the public, but you already have a constituency out there of a lot of groups that said, hey, there are some real gaps, flaws, omissions, and so on. And it seems to me that maybe the right place to start is not on another scoping sort of meeting with the public to sort of explain what's already been done, because we've had, frankly, a lot of those, but actually to reach out to constituents that have raised concerns that have not been even remotely addressed at this point.
And actually, Bob, I want to respond to that, in that our concern is making sure, and the core has been requested to provide, what were the public comments and how have they addressed those? That's part of that presentation.
Yeah, my point here, Peggotty, is that you have constituencies that have tracked this thing, that in some ways it starts to feel a little like Groundhog Day of we want to know what you think, and then we tell you what we think, and then you go back out and say, we're going to give you more information about more opportunities to sort of do that. Why not reach out to the groups actually that raised specific concerns at this point? Or should we just all attend this meeting on Zoom?
Bob, I appreciate that, but that's not Peggotty's job.
Okay.
That's the core's job. And so
the core's job, Mike, is that?
What's that?
No,
isn't it?
No, I think there's
job to respond.
More conversation around it. But no, I see it actually. We now have this entity. We have the prior board. We have the districts themselves. We have the core, and the core has not made space for that. And I think all these different entities sort of weigh in and encourage the core to keep going. The responsibility starts to shift to groups like the one that we're on right now, the prior board that's still in existence, and the districts themselves. Because either you're going to carry that message to, or I should say, we're going to carry that message to the core, or we're not. The core, basically, as far as I'm concerned, has already slammed the door.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to, Bob made my point perfectly. People have got the whole thing confused, and being able to decide what this board's supposed to do versus Levy Ready Columbia versus the drainage districts. And so I'm of the thought that I don't care if you hear something 50 times. And I think, Mike, you even said it, even you get confused at times. And so I think that 101's not going to be hurt, because the more you hear it, the more you'll understand.
Okay, I've got to do, you haven't even talked about the executive director yet, have you? Peggy,
Yeah,
have you talked about the executive director yet?
no,
Okay, you've got about,
no, I'm just giving an update here.
Okay.
The final thing I want to put in front of everybody is our existing districts are going through, taking the steps for their requirement for this new district, which is to begin to identify and inventory their assets and liabilities. They have set up a work group. And one of the things that came clear to us as we've talked to other agencies across the region who have done this sort of thing is a recommendation that it might be helpful to have 2 members of this board participate in that work group. I anticipate that it is going to be about 6 meetings between now and the end of June, about an hour apiece. And part of the effort is to ensure we've had it raised multiple times. How do you make sure that what we're doing at the districts meets and is understood by the new district? So we are providing an opportunity. If any 2 members of this board would like to participate, we would like that feedback.
I certainly would.
Okay, perfect, Mike.
this is,
Anybody else?
He's not going to jump in. I'd be happy to serve on that. I've done asset reserve studies in the past, so I'm familiar with what the work is and would be happy to do that.
Okay, got 2 names. All right, anybody else interest? Got 2. Okay, the other thing I just want to raise for you all, because Mike has talked about it, I'm going to allude to it again, is we do need, as we're moving forward, to set up some committees. They don't have to be set up today. I just want to plant the seed and understanding who, I don't need to know who, I just want you all to think about what your role may want to be. Is I looked at, we're going to need a group for the mission, vision, values. We're going to want to do it for the revenue development, environmental equity. Those are some things that I see that's going to take more work than what can be done in one of these meetings and deeper conversations. So I just want to put those out there for you. And I'm finished, Mike.
okay.
Can I ask a question?
Some of those
Quickly?
bodies in November.
So, Mike, go ahead.
Can we get a list of members and phone numbers so that we can talk?
I'm sorry, that's against the rules. You can't talk to each other. No, I'm kidding. Yes, of course,
There's a
good.
bit of a limit.
of
We can have quorums, that's for sure.
course we can get a roster.
Please add staff information to that too.
Yeah, just if you do talk, don't have a big collection of folks where you're having a quorum and inadvertently having public meetings without having issued public notice of that meeting. You can
Yes.
talk and share ideas, but please don't make decisions or meet in serial meetings that would ultimately be considered a deliberative effort to make a decision.
So Hung, would you please send a memo to the board about quorums and meetings, and because the data chain is not necessarily evident to everybody.
Got it.
That being a violation of open meetings law. So everybody understands that if it's a quorum and we're all together, that's a meeting. But not always do we understand that if we have a single topic and we daisy chain it around to enough people, that's a meeting too.
Correct.
So a memo from you to the board about open meetings law would be great. Too detailed, but something would be good for everybody.
Mike, just
excuse me, I would be remiss if not before 5 o'clock, I don't ask for public comment. And so have we had anybody who wants to speak to us, Emily?
Not that I know of.
Okay, great. So what did you have, Peggy? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was just going to say, when we send out the updated list of the individuals and the phone numbers and contacts, we will provide that note from Hong as well. So it's all in one piece.
Well, that's great. Thank you. So
Great.
before we end today, it's been brought to my attention that we don't have enough time to talk to each other. And so these agendas are too full, and we're trying to do a lot. And I understand that, you know, we're on the steep part of the learning curve here and trying to put a lot of things in place so that the district can operate legally and within budget law and all the rest of the things we have to do. And so I appreciate that, but it's apparent that we've got to slow down some of the more substantive parts so that the board has more time to chew on things. And so if you have comments toward that, you'd like to give me any advice on how agendas are constructed, please feel free to send me a note. I'm happy to take that under advisement. I'm going to work with the staff on how we can structure these in such a way that we have a little more time to chew on issues, at least the more substantive ones, as we move forward. So I apologize for trying to maybe put too much on these agendas, and I'll try to curb my appetite a little bit. So with that, any final comments for the good of the order today? I really want to thank you guys for taking the time. I know these are drinking from fire hose meetings. I know we got a lot of things going on. And we will attempt to make it a little less staccato in the future so we can have a little more time to talk. So take care of all of yourselves, okay? We really appreciate your time and energy on all we're doing.
Thank you for doing this too.
No, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So